And joining us now to discuss the court's decision is Jeremy Rosenthal, trial attorney and founding partner of Rosenthal, Calabus and Therian. Jeremy, good morning. Thanks so much for coming on.
Good morning. How are you?
Great, thank you. Jeremy, explain the logic behind the reversal.
Okay, what happened here was that the judgment of the trial court, you got to remember there are several layers of courts that are sort of involved here. The very lowest level court is called a trial court. They review evidence, and that judge said that Donald Trump committed fraud, that the Trump organization committed fraud, Eric Trump, Donald Jr. committed fraud. And the question is, well, what's the punishment for that? Well, they entered into what's called a disgorgement award, a disgorgement judgment. And they calculated that at roughly $400 million, saying that that is, in essence, the damage that was caused by the fraud. There was another $100 million or so of interest, making it about a $500 million judgment against the Trump's organization and Donald Trump. The appellate court came back, the next highest level court, and said that we don't know how you got to that number. It's really difficult to get to that number. There was a lot of disagreement amongst the panel. Some people thought that it was somewhat vindictive. Donald Trump was not cleared of fraud. The Trump organization was not cleared of fraud. In fact, the judges said, no, we still think that this fraud happened. We just can't justify this $500 million penalty. The penalty has been vacated for now, but there's a lot of what's called injunctive relief, which remains, meaning that Trump, his sons are not allowed to run businesses, not allowed to necessarily apply for loans in New York State as long as this happens. But we're only at the middle level. Now we're going to go to the highest court in New York, and we'll see what they say.
So, Jeremy, a lot to break down here. How about, so the president, you said, the fraud conviction has not been overturned, if I understand what you're saying. Will the president have an opportunity to appeal that? Was he hoping? Was that a possibility that that fraud conviction would have been overturned at this point?
I'm sure he would like that finding to have been vacated as well. It was not, but look, anytime you have a court that tells you you don't owe $500 million, it's a pretty good day for you, right? So I think he'll take it. It could be that he ultimately gets another bite at the apple here. It could be that he gets another day. One of the things that the appeals court considered was sending it back down to the lower judge to have a redo. And it may be that when it goes up to the Court of Appeals in New York State, it may be that they ultimately send it back down to the lower level and say, listen, just do it all over again. So that's the interesting part here. So it could ultimately turn into a vindication for him. He may get another day in court. Then again, the higher courts may be sort of left with that finding. One of the things that's really difficult about courts is that not all judges have witness stands where they listen to testimony. The Supreme Court, nobody testifies. You argue the law. Only that entry-level judge can hear evidence of fraud in one way, shape, or form. And whatever that judge decides, you're kind of stuck with at the higher levels.
So the president is casting this as a total victory, but from what you're saying is there is still a ways to go in this case.
Right. This is the second or third inning is probably the way to think of this if this were a baseball game. It's simply a really long process. And we always knew that it would be, right? Letitia James has said she's certainly not backing down from this. The entry-level court has made their ruling. Now it's going to go up. It's not uncommon in cases that are worth this type of money. It's not uncommon for them to go up and down the courts multiple times, all the way up to the New York Court of Appeals. Maybe potentially they have got a way to try to get it to the U.S. Federal appellate courts. We don't know. But no, this is not over by a long shot.
Now, you mentioned, I think, in your first answer, Jeremy, that there wasn't necessarily unanimous. The decision wasn't necessarily unanimous. At least the thinking in the end was not necessarily unanimous. But what did you glean from the remarks from the various judges who were behind this decision?
A lot of division. There were some that felt like Letitia James was vindictive. They felt like that this was sort of excessive, that this was overkill, that the punishment didn't necessarily fit the crime, if you will, although this was all civil. So I think that's a big part of it. But ultimately, what happens is you get what's called a plurality judgment. That's what happened here. You have 5 judges. 3 votes will carry it, but they couldn't agree on why, essentially. But 3 of them did agree that at a minimum the judgment should be vacated. At least the $500 million ought to be vacated. But they couldn't decide, do we send it down back to the lower court? Do we dismiss the whole thing out altogether? What do we do here? That part they couldn't agree on. But you had 3 votes that the money part of it should be scrapped.
Do you have any idea, look, there was division there. From the remarks, do you have any idea where this case may end up, what the ultimate decision in this case may be?
Ultimately, I think what is likely is that it may go up to the Court of Appeals, to the New York Court of Appeals, which is their Supreme Court. And basically, I think what they're very likely to do is, I don't know that they're empowered necessarily to throw out the fraud part of it. They may be, but I don't know that they would be inclined to. I think what they'll do is send it back to the original judge to say, you got to figure out another way to calculate this disgorgement judgment. $500 million is wildly excessive and is not really based on any fact. When you have Donald Trump, who is accused of and found to have inflated property values, inflated square footages, things like that. The question is, what's the state really out? And that's kind of an argument that Trump has advanced, saying, look, okay, even if we are liable for this, and they've denied that they are, even if we're liable for this, okay, fine. If I got a loan from a bank that I never should have gotten, how's the state of New York really entitled to money for that reason? And that's the ultimate question is, if there's a damage amount, what should that be? And it's clear that the court in New York said, well, we know it's not $500 million.
Jeremy Rosenthal, thank you so much, sir.
Have a great day.